Personally, if you personally invite them, they come. Hi. All right, well, I can start. Sharon's there. She can hear me. Hi, Sharon. Okay, so we have a wonderful evening planned with Reverend Diane Decker here. But before she starts, we just wanted to let you know some of the things that are going on just this week. So tomorrow night is the rite of passage, the last one. You don't have to have taken the first one to be there. It's a very, very powerful workshop. I had the opportunity to take it, as I said, on Sunday, and it's just going to shift you. I just know it because it shifted me, and I'm his wife. Anyway, and then on Friday we have spiritual cinema, and we're showing the film Buddha, the story of Siddhartha, and it's wonderful. We just watched it. If you want to, anything about Buddhism is just, and it's done really, really creatively and really interestingly. And then on Saturday we have nothing going on besides getting ready for Sunday. And Sunday we have a very important meeting after the service, the celebration service, which is birthday Sunday. We have a very important meeting about the future of our center. And that picture over there, and what's behind that picture majorly. So that's all I have to say. I want to remind you that there is a donation basket, and it helps the evenings and that we do to go forward and prosper. So we hope you'll consider making a donation. And now I'm just going to turn the time over to Reverend Diane.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. And I just want to take a moment and open us up with a centering prayer, just to get us all grounded right here and right now. And so as we take a breath together, just knowing and remembering that there is only one thing going on in this world. It is this thing called life, and it is God, the presence, the power, the love in and through everything that we see and even what we cannot see. And so I connect with that now, knowing that I am immersed in it, I am expressing it, I am speaking it, and this is the truth for each one of us here tonight. We are here by divine appointment to give and receive, to share wisdom with each other, and to leave with a blessing. And so each one of us will hear exactly what we came to hear this evening. We'll take away something that improves their life, and will have a greater understanding of this thing that's going on, this thing called life. Whole, perfect, and complete all the time, including this evening. I call it good. I give thanks for it being done already in the mind of God, and I allow it to come forth in all of its perfection. And so it is. Mahalo for joining me. I, unlike some of the other presenters of the Meet and Greet series, I really don't like PowerPoints, and so I didn't do one tonight. They're very helpful for keeping yourself organized and for putting a lot of information out there. But we'll use some videos and some discussion and some handouts, and we'll talk about Charles and Myrtle Filmore. If you don't know, and many of you already do know, that Charles and Myrtle Filmore, and especially Myrtle Filmore, was the founder of Unity School of Christianity, Practical Christianity. And the reason they called it that was because you have to practice these principles in order for them to work in your life. And so they were Christian, but they were not a new denomination of Christianity. At least that's not the way they started. It began back in the late 1800s when Myrtle Filmore and Charles were attending classes at the Illinois Metaphysical College. Dr. E.B. Weeks was the speaker one night and for this particular class, which absolutely changed Myrtle's mind. She heard something and came away with something that she never knew before, and that was that I am a child of God and I do not inherit disease. If I am a child of God, there's no way I could inherit disease because God is not diseased. And so this worked on her and worked on her and worked on her, and she had a complete healing as a result of changing her mind about what had been going on in her life. She had always been a sickly child and came down with tuberculosis, and then was exposed to these teachings, which helped her completely heal from being what they thought of as a weak, sickly child to being a vibrant woman who started a new movement that absolutely changed our world. And so she learned about using the power of prayer to change conditions, and specifically they were working with the body at first. When they changed their mind about their bodies and how they were expressing, they noticed that the body of their affairs were also changing. They were becoming more prosperous. They were, relationships were healing. And both Myrtle and Charles had a healing physically that is pretty miraculous. Tuberculosis, or she doesn't even call it tuberculosis, she calls it TB, because I think she did not want to give it the power of that big name that the medical community gave it. She healed herself from the effects of having TB for a year. And Charles Filmore had an accident when he was around 10 years old, an ice skating accident that damaged his hip and his leg. And his leg kind of withered a bit, and he limped for most of his life. When he saw the change that came about in Myrtle, he started applying these principles in his own life also. Isn't that often the way it works, that he was very intellectual, very scientific, very logical. Everything was, a process, and you can just see that it'd be like, okay, Myrtle, you go ahead and do your thing. But then when he saw her healthy again, after so many years of failing health, it got his attention. It also got a lot of other people's attention. They didn't set out to start a church, to start a movement, to start anything, actually. She was just healing her own life. And then he saw that it worked, and he healed his own life. And then their family saw what had happened to them, and they shared what they learned with their family, and they also created healings in their life. And then they started telling their friends. And Myrtle Filmore says, we created this little society. That's what she thought of it, very much like a family. And everyone was close, everyone was related, and they got together and they prayed for each other and they healed, and the word got out. And you can imagine that it would. We're looking at her experience with Dr. Weeks happened in 1886. I may have to look for my note. 1886. 2 years later, Charles was healed of his illness in his leg by the power of what he called regeneration through prayer. He thought and taught that the body could be regenerated from anything. Now you can imagine him trying to regenerate a limb, this withered limb that had not been used in many, many, many years, except to limp, and have a hard time walking. And now he could walk nearly normally within 2 years. And that's pretty amazing, and he called it regenerating the body. So people took notice of this, and you can imagine that would happen in their well, I didn't even tell you, Kansas City, Missouri. They were in Kansas City, and the New Thought movement was coming along. They were interested in, thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau. They were going to different classes. Emma Curtis Hopkins ran the Illinois Metaphysical Institute. That's a connection that you might have heard about in the other meet and greet series of our New Thought folks. There was, in our direct lineage, I guess you would say, Mary Baker Eddy trained Emma Curtis Hopkins. Emma Curtis Hopkins became known as the teacher of teachers. She trained R. Ernest Holmes, and she trained Charles and Myrtle Filmore as well. And she ran the Illinois Metaphysical College, where they first saw these lectures by Dr. Weeks. As devotees of Emerson, they studied all those leading teachers of the day, and they shared these spiritual teachings with, everybody that would listen, I guess. Think about what it's like for you when you find something new. and it changes your life. You tend to talk to everybody that you know about what's going on, or they notice a change in you, and that's kind of what happened with Myrtle. They were like, something's different about you. What are you doing? Have you ever had anybody ask you that? In New Thought, we have that happen quite a bit, because as soon as we change our mind about something, our life shifts. Yes? Yes. And people notice that. Wow, you're looking great these days. I don't know what it is, but you're doing something different, aren't you? Yes. Prayer and meditation is healing my body, healing my life, and that's exactly what Myrtle Filmore said. Well, they had this little society going, as she called it, and Charles started writing about what they were doing, and he created a magazine called Modern Thought. That was the forerunner of what today is called Unity Magazine. So it's been in almost continuous publication since 1889, first under Modern Thought and then now under Unity Magazine. And they started distributing this to get the word out about what they were doing. And the Society of Silent Help, which is what they called it, began to grow. And it began to develop into the Unity movement. The Society of Silent Help was a prayer group that met to help each other, support each other in their healing, and it evolved into what is now known as Silent Unity, where prayer is happening and the light is on 24/7 at Unity Village. And this has been going on for over 100 years. It's amazing to me that someone who just wanted to better their own life could be, the impetus for this huge change in a way of thinking, in a way of being, and make such a huge impact on the world, changing so many lives. This is just the little history part. We'll get into some fun stories too. But they created Modern Thought magazine. Then they started publishing books. And just as a little aside, they would not use leather binding on their books because they were vegetarian and believed that it was wrong to make a profit or benefit from killing animals. And so they have always had cloth-bound books. Here's an example of an oldie that I was able to locate. So they never used, I don't know how I got on that tangent, but they began publishing. Harriet Emily Cady produced Lessons in Truth, which I had heard was like the foundational basic text of unity. And after talking to a few people, I found out that, actually the Bible is the foundational basic text of unity. And Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth helped to explain a lot of the ways that we can use that Bible wisdom in everyday life. So it was used in a way that helped people make Christianity more practical. They began teaching classes. That was the very beginning of Unity School of Practical Christianity. It became a seminary where they trained ministers, and in 1906, the first class of ordained ministers were released on the world. It was a class of 9, including Myrtle and Charles Filmore. They had created a test to administer, just like us as ministers had to take tests and the practitioners have to take tests. And they missed one of the questions on their own test, although they still let themselves be ordained. Today, there are more than 600, it grew into more than 600 Unity churches, and today there are thousands of worldwide Unity churches and study groups worldwide. One of the ways that they branched out in growing Unity Village was they first bought about 50 acres in Missouri and created Unity Farm. And they were growing fruits and vegetables to feed the people that were coming there to learn about healing. They were selling fruits and vegetables, and people, even Now that farm is it's still a working farm to bring vegetables and fruits to the vegetarian restaurants that are there. And also people come from congregations all around the world to be in service at Unity Farm and to help with things there. That was the next thing they did, was buying those, I believe it was 53 acres, and it was purchased for that farm, but also as kind of a retreat where people could go to learn spiritual truths and to study together. So that was kind of the fundamental thought, was let's get out of the city and go someplace where we can concentrate on spirit. And those are kind of the humble beginnings from which all this grew. I'd like to shift now to Myrtle Filmore and talk to you a little bit more about her. And I'm going to introduce her with a short video. Let's see if we can get the signal back. Okay. There she is.
She's known as Myrtle Filmore, the co-founder of Unity along with her husband Charles Filmore. But she was born Mary Carolyn Page on August 6th, 1845, the seventh of 9 children. As a child, she adopted the name Myrtle and would later reject the teachings of her strict religious parents. Ever since she was a little girl, Myrtle had been sick. At a young age, she contracted tuberculosis. For many years, she believed she was incurably weak and sickly.
I had all the ills of mind and body that I could bear. Medicine and doctors ceased to give me relief, and I was in despair.
That was until Myrtle discovered new spiritual ideas and principles we now call unity. The year was 1886, and Myrtle was in her early 40s. She and her husband Charles attended a lecture by metaphysician Dr. E.B. Weeks of Chicago. Myrtle left the talk with a stronger faith and an understanding of her innate divine potential for healing through affirmative prayer.
It flashed upon me that I might talk to the life in every part of my body and have it do just what I wanted. I began to teach my body and got marvelous results.
Instead of seeing her body as weak, inefficient, and diseased, she began speaking words of strength and power to every part of her body: her liver, stomach, abdomen, limbs, eyes, and heart.
I didn't get discouraged at their being slow to wake up, but kept right on, both silently and aloud, declaring words of truth until they did respond. And neither did I forget to tell them that they were free, unlimited spirit. I told them they were the centers of life and energy, omnipresent.
Myrtle began regularly affirming,
I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness.
By repeating this affirmation, Myrtle believed she was going to get better. And 2 years later, she did. In 1888, she was healed of the tuberculosis condition that had threatened her life. Myrtle remained committed to blessing and encouraging her body with true thoughts and words.
I became very watchful as to what I thought and said. I didn't let any worried or anxious thoughts into my mind. And I stopped speaking gossipy, frivolous, petulant, angry words.
Myrtle was excited by her healing discovery, and so were her family and friends. She began working with others in need of healing. In time, her husband Charles Filmore began his own practice of prayer and meditation. He began to heal from an ice skating accident he had at age 10. In 1889, inspired by Myrtle's transformation, the Filmores founded the Unity Movement in Kansas City, Missouri, as a healing ministry based on the power of prayer and the power of thoughts to create reality. In 1890, the couple pioneered a prayer outreach that grew into Silent Unity, the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week prayer ministry that still serves the world today.
I want everybody to know about this beautiful, true law and to use it. It is not a new discovery, but when you use it and get the fruits of health and harmony, it will seem new to you. and you will feel that it is your own discovery.
Myrtle Filmore made her transition on August 6, 1931, at age 86. Her work lives on through Silent Unity and the inspiring manuscripts and personal papers in the Myrtle Filmore collection at the Unity Library and Archives. The collection is being digitized for online access. To learn more or help support this effort, visit unity.org.
You guys all go away. There we go. Okay. Let's see what happens if I just do that. No such luck. This is what Diane's world looks like in the middle of the ocean. So Myrtle Filmore was known as the mother of unity, and people that knew her closely called her Mama Myrtle, which I just think is a sweet way of speaking to someone that just had a really huge heart. She treated the people that were around her as though they were family. They ate together. She wrote personalized letters when they contacted Unity for help and healing. And some of her letters, it's actually, the collection of her letters is my favorite book of hers. It's called The Healing Letters of Myrtle Filmore. And they collected and edited it and put it into topics so that you can see how she spoke to people. She was rather humble in her writings. I don't know that she was in real life. She was a bit of a feminist, and she did what she thought was best, and she started this movement. Women didn't do those kinds of things. A little bit before Unity began, she went to Texas to heal from tuberculosis, and there she met Charles Filmore, who was kind of a, I don't know. He got fired from his job in Texas, and he was, working in industries that might not be so savory. And when he met Myrtle, they fell in love, and you can just imagine this, romance. And they moved to Colorado, which at that time was the wild, wild west. She was raised in a well-to-do family, and you can imagine also what her family must have been thinking when she decided to move with this hooligan to the wild, wild west and live in Colorado, with him. And there they got married, and they started having a family. So they had their first 2 children in Colorado, and before they moved back to Kansas City, Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri is where they had their third and final child. And but what Myrtle used to say was, being an independent, strong woman, when someone would write to her and say, what a wonderful thing you're doing and how amazing it is that you have started this movement, she would say, oh dear, I just got my ideas from God, and I shared them with people because they helped. I mean, it's like, that's all I did. I didn't do anything. But when she was, doing her thing, she was a very strong, independent, courageous woman, but liked to be, self-effacing otherwise. I was reading one of her healing letters. When they had their house built in Unity Village, it didn't have a kitchen because Myrtle didn't like to cook. Charles's mother cooked for them always because Myrtle didn't like to cook. So if you can think about, the early 1900s, that was kind of odd for a woman to say, I'm not going to cook, But in her writings, she says, they make me work all the time, but I kind of sneak into the kitchen to do the dishes sometimes. Can you imagine? I can't. If I don't like to cook, I'm not going to be in there doing the dishes either. But she makes it sound like, yes, I'm still a lady and I like to do ladies' things. When really, around the back of the scene, we're seeing her kind of wearing the pants in the family. So, but she was a very loving person. People were she was very kind to them, and she, like I told you, she treated everything like a family. She was especially enamored with making these spiritual truths that can be rather heady and hard to understand available and accessible for children. And so she started publishing Wee Wisdom magazine. Very clear in her thinking, she was able to break down these complex ideas into ways that children could understand. And she did this through writing nursery rhymes, well, I guess you'd call them nursery rhymes, poetry, and songs that helped the children remember these spiritual truths. And often they were rhyming little rhymes. When I spoke at the Unity Church in Eureka, California, one of the things I noticed about this congregation was the longtime Unity members just had this stuff right on the tip of their fingertips, right on the tip of their tongue. I'm mixing metaphors. Learning from the master. They would say, I got in this car accident and instantly I thought, God is my present help. And, that the wisdom of God knows what to do, so I know what to do. And it would just be right there, And what I realized after reading about her and the way she taught children was because they grew up hearing this over and over and over again and memorizing these spiritual truths in a way that they could understand that it was available to them instantly when they needed it. That's something that I didn't grow up with. I don't have that, accessible to me. I've had to train my mind as an adult to remember that God is right where I am. God is right where I am. Everything I need is already known in the mind of God. But to imagine what it's like to grow up as a child and just know these things and have it be part of your working life. I've met these folks as adults, and they're amazing examples of living practical Christianity, of living the New Thought principles. Longtime Unity members also have the practices down. For example, there was a centurion in that congregation named Ruth, another elder in the congregation named Ruth, like we have. And whenever we would talk about tithing, she would have her story that she had to tell us about growing up in a Unity household where tithing was absolutely expected. And during the Great War, as it was known then, the children sold newspapers and delivered newspapers to make money, and she would make 10 cents a month, 10 cents a month, and her mother would make her put 1 penny away for tithing. And she'd say, but Mom, I can't give up, 1 cent, because that bought a lot back then. But they would put it in a ledger. 10 cents was earned, 1 cent goes to tithe. And then on Sunday, they would take their penny and they would put it in the tithe basket. So they just grew up understanding the principles and also understanding the practices so that they came up in life just knowing what they knew. All right? No one had to be trained later on to put a tenth in the basket. One of the prayers that I heard every week while I was speaking at Unity was the prayer for protection. And if you know it, you can say it with me. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. And all is well, I've heard added later on. And it's things like that they repeat every week or every day in their household that allowed them to get that. And whenever they had a moment of need or a moment of doubt, it just floated right up to remind them. And that was some of the success of Unity, was that people grew up and were immersed in the teachings and understanding the truth. I have a couple of handouts. Sue, can you help me with this? There's 3 for each person. They're collated. There's 3 for each person. And the first one I'd like you to find is the one that says Comprehensive Denials and Affirmations. In Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady, there are a set of statements which help us to align our thinking with the truth. And these are statements that we train our mind with, allowing us to remember truth, that there's only one power and one presence, and that is God. Now, this practice came directly from Emma Curtis Hopkins. We have one of her books out that you can look at, but I noticed that some of the practices that I learned about Emma Curtis Hopkins I saw quite often in the Filmore's work. And the use of denials and affirmations is one of them. Towards the middle of the page, there are listed 4 comprehensive denials. And denials are used as statements of letting go or releasing something from your life. We don't deny the fact, the feelings, or our emotions, but we deny that they have power over us. And so that's what the denials are used for, is to say, for example, that yes, I've broken my leg, but I deny that it is going to stay broken. I know that there's a healing power and presence within my body that even now is healing this apparent fracture. And so that's what denials were used for. Ernest Holmes also used denials, although they've kind of fallen out of practice so much. I think maybe people think it means that we're affirming what we don't want when we use denials, but it is denying their power. And this is one of the things that I find helpful in the unity teachings, is they don't say this isn't happening. Now, we don't say that either as teachers of New Thought, but sometimes people believe that it shouldn't be happening, that there's something wrong with them if there is something going on in their life. And unity was very specific in saying, you see the condition, you know it's there, but you deny its power in your life. So in no way are they doing like the spiritual bypass thing that sometimes happens when people don't understand New Thought principles. We're not in denial about challenging events occurring in people's lives. We see that happen all the time. But we're always free to choose our response to the situation. And it's this knowledge of spiritual truth that allows people to move beyond what they're seeing and experiencing to get to a better and more positive experience. So, and then affirmations are a way that we train our mind to think in a more productive way. The 4 comprehensive denials are: there is no evil. Emma Curtis Hopkins said that evil is not a thing of itself, that it was the way people act in the world, but there is no opposite to God. And so evil is not a thing in itself. It can be an experience of life, but it's not something we have, something like opposed to God. There is no absence of life, substance, or intelligence anywhere. So if God is all there is, God is life, the one life that's happening everywhere present, how can there be some place where it's not? What we believe is that God is omnipresent, meaning it's everywhere, and unity taught this also. Pain, sickness, poverty, old age, and death cannot master me, for they are not real. Now that's a hard one to get behind, isn't it? That because we experience those things about our body. Eric Butterworth said that part of our problem in embodying New Thought principles is that we think we're a body that has a soul. And in fact, we are a soul that has a body. And so if we were thinking about ourselves as a soul, we can move through these challenges that manifest in the body instead of identifying wholly with this fleshy thing we carry around with us everywhere we go. We know that our soul is always whole, perfect, and complete. That's not difficult to understand. But when we're feeling pain in our body or experiencing a challenge in our body or our mind, it's hard to remember sometimes that I am a soul, whole, perfect, and complete, and allowing that to infuse the body with greater health. There is nothing in all the universe for me to fear, for the Christ that I am is greater than that which is in the world. Christ is not a name, it's a title. And when we embody the Christ presence, which unity teaches, then we are living according to Christ's principles and earning that title that is that Jesus the Christ earned as well. The 4 universal affirmations: God is life, love, intelligence, substance, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence. I am a unique expression of beingness. In each moment I express life, love, wisdom, power. I am wholeness, and I am governed by spiritual law. I am spirit, perfect, holy, harmonious. Nothing can hurt me or make me sick or afraid, for spirit is all good, and good cannot be sick or hurt or afraid. I manifest my real self through this body now. Divine will is always my greatest potential good. When I am aligned with divine mind, I cannot fail. Wouldn't it be wonderful if our children grew up knowing that they are aligned with divine mind and could not ever possibly fail? And one more all-around affirmation is, God in me is infinite wisdom. I know just what to do. Just having that on the tip of your tongue whenever you need to be, buoy yourself up is a wonderful gift that we can give to ourselves. I forgot to say this at the beginning, but if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand. You don't have to wait till the end. So Charles Filmore. I told you that he had always walked with somewhat of a limp from his ice skating injury, and that he had a philosophy of regeneration, and that's how he healed himself. Although I had heard that he's kind of a strict and fundamentalist metaphysician, he denied Christian fundamentalism, but he was very fundamentalist as far as New Thought teachings would go. One of the things that they had, because they chose to be vegetarian, a funny story, I don't remember if Sharon or someone else told me the story about the unity picnics they would have for holiday celebrations and such. And Charles would go around checking people's picnic basket to make sure they weren't bringing meat onto Unity Village. And when he found them, he would take it and tack it up on the tree as an example. You can't, no ham for you, no hot dogs for you. Mr. Stover, would you mind turning the air conditioning down a little bit? Thank you. I'll be okay. I just noticed others are getting cold and I can feel it on my arms. Want everybody to be comfortable. Anyway, don't try bringing meat to a Unity picnic, because the rule was this was a vegetarian community, and their restaurant only served vegetarian food, and there was a whole teaching behind this until after World War II, they were very strict about vegetarianism. Myrtle said, "I will not eat any murdered thing." That's the way she thought of it. And Charles was a little bit more scientific about it. He said that he wanted to regenerate his body and to live a healthier life. And so he didn't think that anything that was dead or dying could bring life. And so he thought of it as wanting to give the freshest, healthiest alive food to his body so that his body could be fresh and alive and well. And so he saw it from that perspective. And he even wrote a whole paper going, trying to prove scientifically why you should be vegetarian and how your atoms respond to living food differently than they do to dead food and all of that. And he wrote in the Unity magazine about, as concerns meat eating, and it was this big essay on why they chose vegetarianism. Yes. It was part of their statement of belief until like 1939, I believe. And now it is no longer. That was taken out of it, and they have started serving a variety of foods at Unity Village. Now, when I think about the years that was, Myrtle had to die first, and Charles had to remarry before those kinds of things happened. So I don't know if this was originally Myrtle's idea or if both of them were very strong in this. But if you think about the timeline, it was she died in 1931 and he remarried a few years later, and so that could have been when the shift started happening. Yeah, good question. Yeah. I don't think I certainly have time to read this to you. This is about meat eating that he wrote in the Unity magazine. Almost 40 years ago, when I began the study of truth, I was told that it made no difference what I ate, if I had the right thought. Now, that's what Ernest Holmes teaches. There's a small section in the Science of Mind text about eating. And the basic idea is to bless your food and know that it heals and nourishes your body. And that's what Charles is talking about. This proved true up to a certain point. When my spiritual development was confined to the conscious mind, there seemed no special need for food discrimination. But gradually, a new phase set in. I found that I was having vibrations in the sympathetic nerve centers. Now, I wonder if he's talking about the chakras, but he called it the sympathetic nerve centers. The subconscious mind was being quickened, and I was becoming a conscious life battery. The vital currents grew gradually stronger and stronger until I could hardly control them. Now, he might be talking about what they call Kundalini, the flow of energy within the body in other faith traditions. Appetite, passion, and emotion were greatly increased, and then my prayers for guidance were answered, and a system of communication was set up with the higher realms of consciousness. I was shown that the food that entered the organism had to pass through a process of regeneration before it was in proper condition to be built into the new Christ body. Just how to carry on this regenerative process in the various subconscious centers was also shown, and here is where I discerned the effects that foods had in building up the body. And so as he became more in tune with his body, now you might have experienced this. I've experienced it myself, where I notice that things that I've eaten or drank for years and years, all of a sudden I don't feel so good. I had the experience with a slab o' meat about a year ago, where it was like, oh, I get to have prime rib when we're going to a nice restaurant, and I ate the prime rib, and I was sick for 2 days, and I had loved prime rib, previously, and I think it was just me being aware of what's going on in my body when I eat and drink certain things. And you might be aware, if you tune into the energy flow in your body in some aspect of any kind of aspect, you might notice how you don't sleep well after you have this, or you don't have as much energy the next day after you've eaten that. And I think that's what Charles is talking about. He was spending more and more time on the spiritual side of life, and so he was gaining a more interior knowledge and intuition that told him what he needed. And for him, the right thing was to choose not to eat meat. I think Personally, I agree. I think along the maybe I'm not there yet. I'm not at the place where I feel like every morsel of meat weighs me down or doesn't add to the life of my body, and so I haven't chosen vegetarianism for myself. But many people do for various reasons, and so that's kind of where Charles was coming from. Once he felt it for himself in his own body, then he could start speaking from that place and say, this is what I choose for me. I would like to give you a rest from Diane speaking in the microphone and give you a little tour of Unity, and I'll show you the next video.